Rosie. Thank you for joining me today. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, good to be here.
Now, obviously, we've known each other. I was looking back on we've been sort of LinkedIn buddies for at least 5 years now. But also we were able to support you last year in your move to Pooch and Mutt, which you are at the moment, and certainly would love to sort of talk a little bit about your background in a second. But I guess the reason that wanted to have you on the show, given your extensive sort of D2C experience, was to talk around what breaks when a D2C brand starts to scale and how marketing leaders adapt. Now, Rosie, a lot of D2C brands focus on scaling revenue, but less gets talked about what starts to break internally as you grow. From your experience, when does that generally sort of start to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, yeah, probably one of the biggest sort of misconceptions maybe about D2C is that, one of the, I mean, obviously it is a big challenge, but that, the main challenge and only challenge of growth is sort of acquiring customers. Whereas I think, or certainly what I found is that in reality, a lot of what breaks first is sort of how the organization learns and makes decisions and kind of keeping that pace that you have when you're a really small startup. You're like maybe a small team all sat in the same room and you're talking to each other and sharing decisions and you all know what's going on. The paid social person can overhear the CRO person kind of talking about their experiment results on a call. So everyone sort of knows what's happening. And then I think, definitely, like as you scale, as you get to be a bigger team, that can sort of stop happening. So, you sort of stop overhearing those conversations, silos start to emerge. And obviously, you sort of get teams that are more specialized. And obviously that's a good thing. Like you want to grow your team and scale. But I think often that can be, where you start to have problems, where you start to sort of slow down in pace. And then I've also found, that as you get bigger and you scale, I think just people get a bit more cautious in terms of what they're trying. And so, when you're a small startup, maybe the traffic, you've not got like masses of traffic going to your site. So
Mm,
you're a bit less worried about running an experiment, if it all goes wrong, you kind of just put it out there and see what happens. But I think as you get bigger, obviously there's more people that are going to be involved, kind of more at stake. So people get more cautious as well. So yeah, I think definitely those kind of two things and just slowing down in pace. At Gousto, I remember we kind of had a big project to counteract that from happening. I think definitely started to see as the when I joined Gousto, we were sort of 75 people in a garage in Acton, and then by the time I left, there were probably about 1,000
wow.
kind of employees, I think. So definitely started to see that, and I remember we called the problem indigestion at Gousto, and then the project name to kind of fix it was called Project Ginger. So at Gousto, all the project names had food were food related, and the idea was that sort of ginger solves your indigestion. So I think sort of fun project names aside, the way that we sort of fixed it there was set up these sort of smaller cross-functional teams where they have one problem to solve, one thing to one kind of set of outcomes to achieve. And that really helped people to, when they were in these small cross-functional teams, it meant that data would be speaking to product, would be speaking to kind of the performance marketing team on a daily basis. And so it just kind of kept up that speed and knowledge sharing.
Hmm.
So I think that kind of is probably one of the biggest problems. And then, one of the ways to solve it. I've been experimenting with some sort of similar ideas at Pooch. So especially around kind of CRO and setting up, like a cross-functional CRO team. And I think I've definitely found we're in sort of the early stages of it at the moment. I've definitely found that you can't just sort of copy and paste an operating model from one company to another. And
No.
obviously every business is different. But yeah, I think just a lesson I've learned is that, once you start noticing those decisions slowing down and kind of pace starting to slow, that's probably when to start thinking differently about the team setup and the operating model.
Nice, nice. And I know we're going to touch upon a few of your experiences shortly, but I guess let's take it back and just briefly touch upon your background. As I alluded to, we kind of supported you last year in your current role as growth director at Pooch and Mutt, which I know has been a whirlwind year with growth and migrations and a rebrand and all sort of that going on. But before that, obviously you'd spent some time, as you mentioned, at Gousto, and I guess you probably from employee, I think you said 75 there through to 1,000 plus when you left. That's you've seen a lot happen during that time. Can you just give us a quick overview of your background, sort of how you sort of got to where you are today, Rosie?
Yeah. So I actually started my career, I mean, it was quite a long time ago now. So back in 2012, in financial services. So on a marketing grad scheme. So digital marketing, but yeah, back in financial services. And that was sort of like coming out of the back end of the financial crash, and yeah, quite an interesting time to sort of be starting in financial services. But I think like probably one of the most formative experiences that I had there, and actually something that has been probably transferable kind of across the different roles that I've had throughout my career, is that I remember I was put kind of very early on in my role there, sort of on the graduate scheme, into a big digital transformation project. And we had, I was really lucky to work with, they had the team come over from the US, so the sort of UX team, UX and customer research team come over from the US and basically teach us all the sort of latest, I think it was called design thinking at the time, but it was basically like how to design in an agile way and test on users and get user feedback and kind of prototype and build things and sort of have that test and learn culture. And they came over and kind of taught us how to do it. And I think it's sort of still the case. Like the US are probably like maybe 1 or 2 years ahead in terms of like the thinking around kind of marketing and building products and sort of that sort of mindset. So yeah, I was really lucky to kind of learn from them. And I think I've kept that with me sort of throughout my career, that a lot of what you do, just that kind of obsession with focusing on the customer and testing things first. And then, sort of building prototypes before you invest in sort of the full build. So that was really good. But then, eventually got bored with financial services. So moved into, a few different industries. I worked in tourism for a bit. And then I'd sort of heard about the recipe box industry and could see how it was disrupting the market, sort of changing how people thought about and how they bought food. So was interested in that category anyway. Thought it was just a really interesting category. And then I was lucky enough to find a role which at the time a completely unknown brand. I think our brand awareness was like 10% or something when I joined at Gousto. And like I say, very small team, like 75 people. In a garage in Acton at the time. Joined Gousto in 2017 and then ended up staying there for about 7 years. So everything just changed. It's such a growing kind of changing company that I never felt that I got bored with kind of whatever role I was in. So stayed there for 7 years, sort of eventually progressed up to head of acquisition. And then the role at Pooch and Mutt sort of came along. And could see it was a really fast-growing business, really strong fundamentals, a category, again, that I find really interesting. I've got a dog myself. I was already a customer, so it felt like a really good fit. Here I am at Pooch and Mutt. And I think sort of looking back, probably the common thread of all those experiences is that, and what I've kept with me probably from those sort of early fundamentals is just the importance of understanding customers deeply. So growth isn't, obviously it is about the marketing channels, but not all about the marketing channels. It's really about understanding customers, testing constantly, building systems that allow you to to test and learn and be faster than your competitors.
Brilliant. Love that. I mean, did you get the feeling when you were interviewing, say, with a Gousto back then, obviously it being relatively unknown, that it was going to be as big as what it turned out to be, or was it kind of just one of those right place, right time?
Honestly, I think it was just the right place, right time. I'd love to sit here and claim that, like, oh no, I predicted this, rise in kind of recipe boxes and the category and the change in sort of how online grocery was going to go. But I think it's more than anything. I think the director of acquisition at the time, a woman called Lavi Franzetti. I remember she interviewed me and just like really got on really well with her. Is someone that's proven to be sort of a really good friend. Obviously now we don't work together anymore. Stayed kind of reporting into her for I think probably like 5 or 6 of the 7 years that I was there.
Right.
And yeah, just was thought that it seemed like a great team to sort of work on and work with. So yeah, I think that was a big part of it, definitely.
And I totally get that when you joined there back in sort of 2017, it was a very different market sort of to what it is today. But I guess today, sort of having D2C experience, it seems to be a lot of the clients that we work with across D2C want that individual with prior D2C experience. Obviously, you came more so from financial services and away from sort of what we would class as probably as D2C nowadays. How was it? Just again, the market was different, or were you able to sort of come at it from a different angle where it sort of made sense?
I guess, yeah, it probably wouldn't be classed as D2C, the role, although I suppose it was in a certain way. So back when I was in sort of financial services, it was, working on a platform for kind of individual investors. So obviously very different to sort of selling, human food or dog food. But I think fundamentally, it's all about kind of like the customer being at the heart, making something that customers could understand. And I think actually even more so in financial services, because you've got all these like really complicated products that it is very difficult to explain them to, sort of like your average person who's maybe not sort of got a background in that. So I think that's probably, maybe a sort of transferable skill that I was able to then sell as, this is actually how, this is sort of what I can then bring to a D2C or more traditional D2C business, I guess.
Nice.
So yeah, I think there's definitely, I was working on, I think, so at in Fidelity, the company that I was in financial services, it was on the digital marketing team there, sort of working on paid search, paid social, as it was then, sort of just emerging, CRM. So yeah, very similar. I say it's all the same channels, but just, obviously moving then into D2C, which is a much faster pace, faster feedback. But I think that's probably how I sort of sold myself into the role, I suppose.
Nice. Well, look, bringing it back to the sort of core topic around what breaks when D2C brand starts to scale, and I imagine obviously you've had varying team sizes in the leadership roles that you've had over the years. I guess from your perspective, Rosie, what does it look like day to day when you're kind of too close to everything?
Yeah, so I think it's a really important point, this one. I think every leader probably goes to a phase where they feel like that, they end up being too close to stuff. I think it's probably honestly like how they got successful in the first place is kind of being on top of everything and sort of knowing things inside out. But yeah, obviously it gets to a point where it's not productive. You become a bottleneck. Your team can't make decisions on their own. They slow down. So you've got to have that discipline, I suppose, to sort of take a step back. And I think like particularly, when I think back to my role at Gousto, I was there for 7 years. I sort of worked my way up. So I was thinking back, and I think at some point or another, I'd, personally managed every single channel that I then ended up, sort of then, managing channel leads of. So I obviously knew those channels really, really well. And it is very tempting then to think, oh, well, how would I do this? Maybe how they're doing it isn't quite the same way that I'd approach, and, want to kind of step in and try and, persuade people that your way is the best way. And, quite honestly, it's not often the case. And, obviously the most important thing as a leader is you want to hire people that are better than you. You want to hire people who, kind of know their channel inside out and will have the ideas and be able to kind of execute on those better than you would do. So yeah, I think it can feel really uncomfortable sort of stepping away. But yeah, that it's important that you're not trying to build a team that just execute your ideas personally. You want to build a team that can make really good decisions without you being in the room, and kind of set up, I suppose, that set up the foundation and the fundamentals to give them the confidence to be able to do that.
Was there sort of any particular time or example that kind of sticks out for you in those earlier years where you were like, look, I need to stop being so hands-on. I need to step back. Was there anything that kind of forced that?
Yeah, I think actually at Gousto it was probably when we moved to the like I say, we moved to this sort of cross-functional tribe structure. And that meant that there's lots of benefits to having that structure, but probably the one downside is that you end up with a lot of meetings, because you have your tribe meetings, you have your functional meetings. I then had my sort of like leadership meetings. So I had these sort of 3 sets of meetings. So I think just from a practical point of view, I was sort of looking at my calendar and being like, I'm just in meetings all day. This is insane. It's not doable. And obviously, there's something's got to change to sort of make my time more productive and to make the team more productive. So yeah, I think that was probably a bit of a tipping point really for me to say, actually, you know what, because we've moved to this cross-functional structure anyway, and I was sort of seeing, I guess, just from the business mindset had definitely shifted to, rather than giving people a roadmap and saying, right, go and execute on it, rather, instead of that, giving people an outcome or metric that they were to move and say, right, go and figure out what your roadmap is, go and figure out how you can best execute on this. So I think that whole shift was sort of happening in the background. And then, just the more practical aspect of, trying to free up my calendar. It's probably those 2 things that led to the shift in thinking.
And I guess as well, it's you can't just one day go, right, I'm going to delegate everything, because it depends how many individuals you've got on the team, where their kind of strengths are. How do you feel that sort of marketing leaders should think about sort of what they own versus sort of what they then end up delegating?
I think for me, it's probably that you own the sort of North Star metric, and you own directionally, what are the metrics that you want the team to move. And then, in an ideal world, you then give those metrics to the team and you say, okay, this is the most important thing for you to be working on. Let's figure out the best way, or you figure out the best way to move it. And then you sort of, you have that more hands-off approach, and you give them sort of like free rein to do that. And it can be quite scary, and it's always quite, it's always very tempting to kind of step in and say, oh, but have you thought about doing this? Or maybe this experiment is going to be, my experience, maybe this experiment is going to be kind of more impactful. But I think it's also important to let the team make their own mistakes, obviously, to a certain extent, and kind of they then learn from that. If that answers the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that all makes sense. And I guess looking at how you then build to scale, and I fully appreciate that, as you said earlier, right, you can't take the exact same playbook with you in each D2C, because they're at different stages of their journey. But I guess through your lived experience, how do you feel sort of brands should think about team structure as they grow?
Yeah, I think there's like I say, there's not one kind of hard and fast rule for what team structure works. Like, I've seen lots of different team structures. I think the tribe structure, sort of like experience at Gousto, where you have these cross-functional teams, does work really well. Like I say, there's pros and cons. The cons being the sort of like meeting times. I think there's a way of solving that. And like I said, I am sort of bringing that into Pooch and Mutt, with the first test being around sort of the CRO squad that we've recently built there. But I think like the most important for me, or like probably most important lesson that I've learned, is just to be continually thinking about team structure. So never just to think, oh, okay, I've got my team now, we've got the perfect structure, I'm going to just sit back and sort of leave it. Because I think then that can, that can be the time when it starts to break, and then you might not notice that it's broken until it's too late. And so I think for me, I try and set aside some time, sort of once a month even, just to think about, is the team structure right at the moment? Is there anything else, is there anyone else that we need? Do we need extra resource? Of the people that we've got, are they in the right, are they in the right structure? Are they in the right places? Do we have the right operating model? I think just being sort of I think especially in a growing business where things are just changing all the time, and sort of priorities change, and roadmaps change, and there's just lots of change going on all the time. I think it's just really important to never just sort of let it lie, to always be sort of questioning whether the team structure is right.
And as that team kind of continues to scale, do you feel have there been any specific roles or capabilities that have become really important, more so than what you probably expected?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think it does really depend on kind of the team. Like I think I guess from a more sort of thinking on a more channel level, definitely, sort of paid social creative strategy, someone who's both creative and can be analytical. Not even just for paid social, to be honest, but probably paid search is moving more that way as well, with kind of demand gen and
Yep.
more sort of creative elements of that channel coming in. So I think that's really important. And then I think probably just from a more I suppose again more on the creative side, I think having a growth team that it depends how the business is structured, but if you're structured in a way where you've got your sort of growth team and you've got your brand team, which I think tends to be how most DTCs are structured, and certainly is how I've in the DTC teams that I've worked in, how they've been structured. But I think having a growth team who really understand brand, and sort of on the same way, a brand team who really understand growth,
Yep.
is just really important. So I suppose that's a capability in a certain sense. But I think that's where I've definitely felt things fall down, is where sort of growth think, oh well, brand's just this like airy fairy thing that's in the background that we don't really care about. And where brand are sort of a bit intimidated or scared of growth because they think it's all just numbers. I think that's definitely where I've seen teams fall down in the past, and it's just so important to have that have that shared understanding there, and almost be holding each other to account for what you're doing, and obviously like have shared metrics that you're both working on together between growth and brand is really important in my experience.
From the teams that you put together at Gousto in that 7 years versus sort of what you've been putting together at Pooch and Mutt now, how has the structure sort of been different over sort of the last couple of years? Because we know, and I guess where this kind of question comes from is, again, I know that as you said, playbooks are different from company to company, but I also, in the last few years, I get the way marketing changes so quickly, new roles come up. I'm sure performance creative strategists are something perhaps that you've got now that maybe in the early to mid years at Gousto probably didn't even come up. So are there any sort of learns that way from the structure that you put together at Gousto that's been different here at Pooch?
I think definitely. So probably around that kind of creative strategy, sort of especially on paid social point. I think we were actually maybe a bit slow at Gousto to sort of realise that was that was necessary, and that we obviously did implement kind of like a creative strategist in the team in the end, and also just increase that sort of scale of creative production. But by the time we got to the size that we had, it was actually a lot harder to do that and sort of scale creative production, than it is in if you're in sort of like a smaller startup. So so I think that was a really important learning, is just if obviously speaking to colleagues that are in smaller startups and they're saying, we're just churning out like 200 creatives a week and throwing them all into testing, seeing what could happen. And I remember at Gousto, we kind of struggled to keep up with that pace because of all the kind of checks and reviews and things that things had to go to. And luckily we did quickly realize that and kind of put it right. But that was definitely a big learning. So I think that's something that I've taken to Pooch, and luckily have a really great paid social team at Pooch who are just completely on the same page with that. Actually sort of created a new role in the last 2 or 3 months, where with someone who's just purely in charge of kind of growth creative strategy. So across the whole of performance marketing, so not just on paid social. So it's someone who came from the paid social team, kind of focusing on that paid social creative strategy, but who's sort of stepped outside of that and is now bringing that kind of creative thinking and that creative strategy and all the frameworks and the models and the kind of AI processes that she's built, kind of like bringing that across the whole team. So nice. That's been really fundamental, I think, to kind of getting creative right.
Nice, lovely. Rosie, I wanted to touch upon performance versus growth as well. I know it's always a bit of a contentious topic. How do you balance sort of short-term performance pressure with longer-term growth activity?
So this is a really difficult one, because I'd love to sit here and say, oh, well, I only ever think about the long term, and all decisions should be made for the long term, and if you have to take some short-term revenue hits, then you should do, because you should always be thinking thinking bigger. But yeah, I think in the reality, like where you've got a business where you've got P&L, you've got a cash flow that kind of needs to work. It's not always, it doesn't always work like that, and it isn't always that kind of like perfect world. So if you have a business and it doesn't have a healthy cash flow, obviously it doesn't matter how good your long-term strategy is, because you might never get a chance to realize that. So yeah, I think it's just always a balancing act between sort of delivering today and investing in tomorrow. So yeah, I think for me, when performance isn't, if you're having to sort of make those short-term decisions to get performance to where it needs to be, I think the most important thing is to, not to overreact. It's very tempting. Mm-hmm. I think especially as kind of like growth marketers, when you're used to sort of like working at pace and, having actions on the table, it's very tempting just to get a load of actions on a page and just throw them out there and say, oh yeah, well, we're doing something. Here's what we're doing. We're in control. But yeah, I think the most important thing is to kind of really sit down, like understand the dynamics of sort of like what's underlying with performance, and think about, how you can counteract those things. What are the most priority actions that you can take? And just make sure that you're sort of, calmly focusing on those things, rather than just sort of throwing everything at a wall and hoping something sticks. So yeah, it can always be tempting, obviously, to just move into sort of short-term mode, but I think a balance is always important.
In your experience, I mean, I know that so many senior sort of growth acquisition sort of leaders want to try and wean themselves off the good old Meta Google drug. Have you come across other channels that have sort of proved to be very useful to bring down that spend in those type of areas at all?
I think it really depends on it really depends on the business. I'd say at Pooch, like we are pretty reliant on Meta and Google, and I don't kind of see that as a bad thing, as long as I think, as long as you do have a diverse channel mix, that you do have something to fall back on, as long as it's kind of not solely on Meta and Google. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely like affiliates, I think, and sort of partnerships. I think partnerships where you've got kind of reciprocal deals, where you can get something in at kind of like £0 CPA, and have a partnership where it's also with a brand that's sort of relevant to your customers as well, and so it has that kind of like potentially has a bit of a brand impact as well. I think that can be really really impactful. I think partnerships is almost you can kind of scale that to, it can be almost as big or as small as you kind of want it to be. And it's a lot about the kind of resource that you put behind it. And so I think that's probably like one of the most interesting sort of channels, I guess, outside of Meta and Google for me. And then I think the other one that's like definitely overlooked is probably referrals. I think, again, a sort of focus for us at Pooch at the moment is building our referrals channel, because it's been a bit sort of unloved over the years. And like definitely saw at Gousto, again, how powerful that channel can be. We got it to a really decent size of kind of acquisition mix at one point. And, the beauty of that channel as well is that because your customers are just your best advocates, and so the people that they're bringing in often are really, really high quality customers as well. So it's kind of a win-win. You're getting like a fairly cheap, well, very cheap sort of fixed acquisition cost, with then a very good lifetime value. So if you can kind of build that channel and really make it work and understand the dynamics behind it, that can be really powerful as well.
Brilliant. Rosie, just before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you one other quick question, because I know at Pooch, you guys obviously work on a sort of fully remote basis within the UK, and kind of do meet up on a quarterly basis. A lot of brands are moving, and there's certainly still some out there that are doing fully remote, don't get me wrong, but I think the consensus is the majority of brands are going more sort of that hybrid approach. Mm-hmm. How as a senior marketing leader, how do you find, and how have you adapted to kind of managing teams on that sort of remote basis?
Good question. I think so. We do try and meet up, actually, like at least it doesn't sound very often, but like once every 3 months we meet up in person, kind of as a digital team, as kind of a performance team. And then we also have at Pooch like a company-wide meetup where it's like lots of fun. We all book a big house and stay
Nice.
there, do like a sort of strategy presentation in the day, and then have a fun bit kind of in the evening. And then everyone stays overnight. So that's, I think that's really good to kind of like build these relationships with colleagues that you wouldn't necessarily like speak to otherwise. But yeah, like we have, so like there's always kind of a constant, I think just practical things like in the calendar. So we have a hangout that's just available for anyone to jump onto like at any point. So if you want to have a chat with someone, either you say, just like, here's the hangout, and you jump on, or it's just available if anyone fancies having a coffee with someone, you can jump on that, and then it might be that someone else is on and you can kind of have a bit of a chat together. So I think that works really nicely. And then we have a couple of team meetings a week. So one of them is one of them is a more formal kind of like performance meeting, and then one of them is a more fun kind of, what's everyone getting up to. Someone might want to present sort of a topic of their choice in the week as well. So and just lots of Slack, I suppose, so that you get quick responses from people. But I think we make it work, and I think the benefits definitely outweigh the sort of negatives for the way that we've made it work at Pooch. And I'm sure it wouldn't work for every business, but I think we've sort of put the groundwork in, and I think we have enough kind of belief in making it work, and enough people who want to sort of make it work that we sort of have done. So
Right. Good to hear. So Rosie, last question to you, just to close up. If you could give one piece of advice to marketing leaders scaling a D2C brand right now, what would it be?
So I think if I could give one piece of advice, and I've sort of touched on it a little bit already, but it's just sort of focus. So I think just, one of the biggest mistakes I see is just brands sort of spreading themselves too thin, trying lots of new channels, new tactics. I think actually Purdy and Fig have been mentioned before on one of your
Christian, I think last time
I think Christian mentioned Purdy and Fig, and I think they've done this really well, where they've just like focused on what they're just like, we're going to go really big on meta, just like absolutely like hammer down on that. And I think that's a really good example. And it might be that it's not quite that intense, where it's just sort of like one channel, but I think definitely think about the 2 or 3 things that are really going to move the needle, and focus on those, and try not to get distracted by all the other things that sort of as a growth leader, it can be very tempting to try out, whether it be kind of new channels, new tactics, new technologies, new opportunities. There's always lots of things competing for attention, but just be very disciplined on sort of where you focus.
Wonderful. Intro. Well, Purdy and Fig, that's second pod show in a row they've been mentioned. So maybe we'll have to try and get someone from Purdy and Fig on the show at some point in the future. But Rosie, it's been a pleasure. Some real nuggets there, and thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.